Talking about Trump and the flurry of executive orders and things like that. Just today, the pardoning of pro-lifers ahead of the March for Life. This is what took place earlier.
Set of pardons for peaceful pro-life protesters who were prosecuted by the Biden administration for exercising their First Amendment rights.
Do you know how many?
I believe it's 23, sir.
23 people were prosecuted. They should not have been prosecuted. Many of them are elderly people. They should not have been prosecuted. This is a great honor to sign this.
So the fact is, with the J6ers, with Ross, and now with this, you have a flurry of pardons that Trump is doing when he's first in office, keeping promises. On the one hand, I'm excited because the J6ers, they need to be released. I'm excited because these pro-lifers were being hunted down by an overzealous DOJ. But at the same time, gives me pause, Brian, because once again, we're relying too much on one person in the Oval Office to fix everything. And we shouldn't get to that point of having to wait for your guy to get into office to fix the mistakes of the other guy. It's just a recipe for disaster.
But my man, we are at that point, and that's the part that hurts, right? We have watched for 70 years, and going back to my point earlier about that imperial presidency, right? We've watched specifically since 1945 the power behind the executive branch continuously grow and grow and grow. And it's not a matter of saying, should we or shouldn't we leverage that power, or should we or shouldn't we have that person in that type of role have that type of power? But at the end of the day, the other side is going to use that power, right? And it's almost a fool's errand to sit on our hands and be like, well, we're going to be the moral, ethical people and not use this power. And then 4 years later, 8 years later, 12 years later, whenever it may be that the other side takes over, they then use every single lever at their disposal to not just go after their political opponents, but do some pretty darn awful things, like in this case, throw them in jail. Now, that's a separate conversation of saying, well, how do we fix this, right? This can only be fixed just as the original, the thing we're talking about with 2 terms versus 4 terms or 3 terms for the presidency. It can only be fixed through an act of Congress, right? This goes back to basic civics, right? You have your judicial branch, your legislative branch, and your executive branch. And we call it what? A balance of powers. The executive branch has for years been accumulating more and more and more and more power, to the point where we are today, where I would dare say it is the largest and most powerful branch of our government. And that's to the fault of the legislative and the judicial branch. Why? Because the legislative branch didn't want to do anything. Because if they voted one way or another that pissed off their constituents, oh man, now all of a sudden I don't have an election I can go win, right? So I'm just going to wait, and I'm going to defer all this to the executive. I'm going to let them go ahead and sign that nice piece of paper, free the J6ers, free the pro-life, folks, whatever it may be, versus actually going out and leading by example, putting tough bills on the docket and voting on it up or down. It's also why we have continuing resolutions, because everybody was afraid of doing single issue votes to actually put their name to paper on saying, yes, I support this, or no, I don't support this. And on the judicial side of the branch, I mean, they've been sitting on their hands for years. Like, we go back to the whole Obamacare, is it a tax or is it a penalty kind of thing, right? Like, they're going in and trying to rewrite laws because they just didn't want to say, no, this isn't constitutional, only if we look at this in a way that it's not a penalty, it's a tax, right? That's not your job. Like, and this is the part where it goes back to, again, the basics of civics. If we actually had 3 equally balanced groups of power, positions of power in our political branches here, then that would actually make more sense, but we don't. So we can either look at the world as it is or the way we want it to be. I think we should always be in pursuit of what we want it to be but at the same point in time, we cannot ignore where we are today and what we're actually dealing with every single day based on the existing circumstances we find ourselves in.
Well, I think that's why Trump won with the mandate that he did. Because people have recognized that fact, that you're essentially now in a race between strongmen to your strong man versus theirs, until we either the whole thing collapse or there's a way to hit a reset button, one way or the other. But until then, you just got to hope your strong man has enough votes. It becomes essentially tyranny of the majority at that point. And that's what it is until you get back to a true root of federalism and you have, the actual legislature taking hold. You need those two things. And just real quick, as the best way I can apply this to people is when it comes to guns. I hate the fact that we have to nationalize everything. I think the national concealed carry thing, stupid idea. I think reciprocity is fine with red states. Every state had 44 out of the 50 state constitutions have some kind of keep and bear arms in their constitution. And that should be the governing thing. There should be no ATF. There should be no any of these things. So in that case, federalism is really the solution to it. But most people don't even understand what federalism is to actually get to that point. But yeah, you're pretty much in a race between your strongman to theirs. And it's unfortunate in that regard. But let's move on.